Hey everybody, welcome to a Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller from Los Angeles inside the press box at SoFi Stadium, which I can confirm is very, very big. And the Minnesota Vikings got a very, very big win for their season to go to 4-5. They beat the Los Angeles Chargers in a game, Sam, in which the Vikings offense in the second half of the game, stay with me here, threw the ball to Justin Jefferson in all the biggest spots and saw the payoff. And I think the biggest takeaway from today was not even just the game and the way that the Vikings responded to a tough loss last week on the East Coast, all the way to the West Coast. And they played a good defensive game against Justin Herbert, an exciting young quarterback, but also Mike Zimmer after the game, making it very clear to the world that he wants Justin Jefferson to get the football all the time, and he wants Kirk Cousins to be aggressive and his offensive coordinator to be aggressive, despite sort of accusations or the thought that Zimmer didn't necessarily want that and wants to be run first. He made it very clear after the game, no. That's what I want it to look like, where we throw it 11 times to Justin Jefferson and he gets 9 catches for over 100 yards.
Yeah, look what comes from those targets. I mean, half of his catches were either amazing acrobatic catches or huge first downs at the time or produced great yak yardage. Remember, this guy doesn't really have weaknesses as a football player. He can make contested catches. He can get yards after the catch. He's going to run good routes when you need him to most. And he's got the big catch to kickstart their go-ahead touchdown drive, 27-yarder in traffic, had a big 3rd and 5 catch over the middle, had an amazing catch over the middle again where he dragged tacklers for a first down. And then, of course, the massive catch along the sideline on the game's final drive on a 3rd down that helped them ice the thing and not give the ball back to Justin Herbert. That's what happens when you throw to a really good receiver. There are no bad targets. And there were a lot of messages sent in this game, especially post-game from Mike Zimmer saying, I've told Kirk that he needs to throw the ball, be aggressive, get it to Jefferson. I've told Justin that he's going to get the ball, sort of massaging his concerns, maybe like didn't happen with Stephon Diggs. He's telling Clint Kubiak to be aggressive as if he hasn't been before, which I think we've seen with our eyes. So Mike Zimmer getting out in front of it saying, hey guys, I understand what you've been writing, what you've been talking about and murmuring about sort of behind my back. I hear it. I know what's said, and I'm aware of what's been ailing us, and I've taken steps to fix it. And at least on this day, he can look at the game and he can say, yep, that's how it's supposed to look.
And not only did they find Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen in the biggest moments today, and you mentioned the final drive, both of them making difficult catches, big plays, Thielen getting open on 3rd and 20 to get 18 yards and then be able to seal the game on the final handoff to Dalvin Cook, a nice pitch play outside where he pushed forward, and he had a good game as well. But Zimmer also, the more aggressive of the two coaches today, it felt like he sort of threw caution to the wind and said, we're not supposed to win this game. The other team has a better record. We've gone through all these things this week. We've had our distractions, the Dalvin Cook story. They've had their injuries and they're missing key starters on defense. So let's just go for it on 4th down and try to make a play. And all the 4th downs came through for them. They went for 4th down at the goal line. Tyler Conklin catches a touchdown. He had a big game in the red zone. And that was one where they had been stuffed several times trying to run it up the middle. And then at the end of the game, he could kick a 54-yard field goal. And I could see why Mike Zimmer wouldn't put it on the leg of a kicker unless he absolutely has to, but they can kick a field goal and hope. And if they miss it, then maybe you're talking about a drive from the Chargers, or just end the game on one play, get 2 yards. And I think that's the statistical better play to go for it. And on the other side, Brandon Staley was shockingly conservative today. He had opportunities to go for it on 4th down. One time took the penalty and punted toward the end of the game. Maybe it would have mattered, maybe not, but he goes for the field goal on 4th and short rather than going for a touchdown, which again, who knows how that changes the Vikings approach at that point. I thought it was very interesting and notable that Mike Zimmer said, I'm just throwing everything at this game and I'm going to be aggressive with my decision-making. And it played out really well for them.
Yeah, and we've seen this occasionally from Zimmer before, where I think he senses there's a little more gravity to the game, and he does make more aggressive decisions. He is not a coach, and I give him credit for this, that is so stubborn that there's no situation where he won't sort of take extra steps. I think he does have that in him. I think the fact that he shows it makes it more frustrating when they don't take that approach and they do one thing one week and then change their approach the next almost arbitrarily. That's where it gets frustrating. Today, he deserves credit. And I'm sure when the analytics reports come out tomorrow, his fourth down decisions will be among the most influential of any in any game this week. And for that, he deserves praise. And that's the kind of decision making that just builds confidence for your offense when, they're trusted to make big plays and they come through. That's huge for your offense's confidence, keeping your defense feeling good, keeping your defense off the field, not putting them in bad spots because, the Vikings defense was helped out by the offense a lot today. They didn't have to spend too much time on the field and they looked fresh and invigorated for being shorthanded and played a really good game in their own right.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. Justin Herbert was very limited today, under 6 yards per attempt. The Vikings seemed to say, you know what? If you can run the ball against us and if you can throw underneath and not hit the big play, as Justin Herbert has become very well known for doing, then so be it. And that approach really played out quite well for them. The 2 touchdown drives that the Chargers had were long drives, 10 plays in the second half to start the second half, a 75-yard drive. 2 touchdowns went both 75 yards. And the Vikings essentially said, okay, if you're going to do that, then do that. There was on the first touchdown drive, a pass interference that was mixed in that turned out to be a big play. And it was a little bit shoddy too on that call, I thought. But they tried to go down the field. And the Vikings basically said no. And both these teams had the same strategy. We're not going to let you hit big plays. The Vikings hit on theirs. The Los Angeles Chargers didn't. And for a team that was missing so many players on defense, it was really the only way that the Vikings could approach it. And talk about impressive. The decision-making was there. The throws to Jefferson was there. And also the scheme to keep Justin Herbert kind of caged today and not allow him to break them with huge plays down the field.
Yeah, by contrast, the Vikings, when they were set back with first and longs or second and longs, they actually came through and salvaged a lot of those situations. The Chargers, on the other hand, were not able to work their way out of trouble. And, there were 2 sacks of Justin Herbert that basically ended those drives before they even began, which were pretty enormous. The interception by Eric Kendricks was a game-changing play after the Vikings had just settled for a field goal. They get the ball right back, go down, score a touchdown, go up 10. That was huge. And they made Justin Herbert uncomfortable a lot. Even though they only sacked him twice, he had a handful of inaccurate throws. He, his best plays were the Vikings pass interference calls. He was 5.7 yards per attempt, just very ordinary as a passer today. Keenan Allen put up a nice box score, but I didn't feel like he was ever torching defensive backs. A lot of that was underneath. Austin Eckler never got going. Credit the Vikings defensively, and I thought their replacement players actually showed up big. I thought Vigil was strong in relief of Barr. I thought Bynum for a second straight week was really good, and I like the defensive line pressure as mentioned. Without Michael Pierce now for an extended amount of time and Danielle Hunter out again, I feel like a couple games in a row now that defensive line has been able to generate enough pressure to unsettle the quarterback.
And you need people to make big plays when that is the case. When you don't have Danielle Hunter consistently pressuring or something like that, you need Cam Bynum to come up with the sack. You need Eric Kendricks to come up with an interception. And they got those splash plays from their defense that have not always been there this year. So I have 2 questions for you pertaining to this game. Question number 1 is, can we take all the hot seat talk on Mike Zimmer and for now put it on the other table? We can slide it aside and say we are not really discussing that. Or do you feel like next week could determine whether the hot seat discussion is still on?
Yeah, I think it's probably on the back burner now. And I guess if it's on the back burner, it can always be moved back forward. But I would tend to think that unless there's a complete embarrassment against Green Bay, that it's not going to happen next week and probably thereafter, because the Vikings are squarely in the playoff race. They're half a game back with 8 games to go, and they have a very soft part of their schedule coming up after Green Bay. That would conclude their gauntlet. And if they're able to beat Green Bay, they come out a tough 4-game stretch going 2-2 with struggling San Francisco, winless Detroit, though they did get a tie. Chicago's on the horizon. Pittsburgh is beatable. There's a lot of winnable games coming up for the Vikings, and at 500 with 7 games to go, they would be looking pretty with a bunch of mediocrity around them. So I would tend to think that because of their proximity to a playoff spot, and I guess the ownership, seeing what happened today and maybe the potential that this team has, that Mike Zimmer has with this win, bought himself time. And we don't know if he was in jeopardy or not. That's all of our, conjecture. But I think that this probably tables the talk for, several weeks, if not the rest of the season.
I agree with you. I think that the talk is, at least for now, 100% tabled unless they have a tremendously bad game against the Packers, but that usually doesn't happen. I mean, they normally play, especially at US Bank Stadium, Green Bay, very tough. And the Packers lost Aaron Jones to injury. They were unimpressive today against the Seattle Seahawks. And really all year, they have not been as strong as they were last year. So I don't expect them to get blown out next week. If that doesn't happen, then we're talking about playoff race, and that's the discussion. And that was my last question for you, Sam, for our Purple Insider Extra. And if you want to hear a longer conversation, by the way, Purple Insider Podcast, it's in the description. If you have not listened to us yet, every single day we're breaking down Vikings football and the NFL. So make sure you go listen to our longer discussions there. But last question for you is, are the Vikings, now that they have this win, they've beat a good team on the road despite a lot of adversity, would you say that they are a favorite to get a playoff spot now in the NFC versus some of the other teams that they're fighting with?
It's crazy, but I might say they're a favorite. And I don't think that today's win rights all of the wrongs. I still think this is a flawed team, but I think that the other teams they're vying with are perhaps more flawed and have a lower ceiling, right? Like Trevor Siemian's ceiling is much lower than Kirk Cousins' ceiling as a quarterback. The Panthers are still figuring out their quarterback situation, and wow, what a win against Arizona today. Granted, Arizona didn't have Kyler Murray, so take that with a grain of salt, but Atlanta is, I think, a pretender. San Francisco is injured and struggling. The Bears, I think, are a non-factor. I don't love anyone, and no one is surging. I mean, it's just a bunch of atrophy right now. So if the Vikings can rattle off a couple, they're going to quickly find themselves in playoff position with no one that I would deem threatening kind of coming up their tail. I guess you could maybe say Matt Ryan is like the best quarterback they're competing against in that mix. There's just not a lot of talent at the bottom or the middle of the NFC. So I think Minnesota could find themselves in a great spot. That Green Bay game is just a huge pivot point for this season. 5-5, very different than 4-6.
And that was everyone's concern when they added the extra playoff seed is, hey, are you going to let a bad team in? Well, it might be 2 bad teams this year, but it opens the door for the Vikings to make the postseason. I'll hold on to that until next week, and we'll see what happens. Because if they get a win next week, I think then we're talking about them as the far and away favorite to win one of those spots. And if they don't, then it's going to be very much a bunch of teams shuffling up and down week by week. So, Sam, great stuff. And I'm going to go spend my last couple of hours in the LA weather and then return to snowfall in Minnesota. So I've got a little bit of a tan. You can't see it because this camera's a little fuzzy, but look pretty good. So, all right. Well, thank you all.
It's good to be you.
It always is. Well, thank you all for watching our Purple Insider Extra. Again, check out the full podcast and our written work at purpleinsider.substack.com, and we'll catch you next time.